two of the reasons why I left the Fujifilm X-T3 for the Lumix S5 is the high ISO performance and the IBIS, especially when it comes to photography, which is what I do most. So I'm about to run through some photo samples and talk about my experience using the S5, using low shutter speeds and high ISO, and how it held up. And spoiler, I am really impressed and satisfied with my decision. Alright, so our first photo here, let's start off small. We're looking at ISO 400, but we're shooting at 1/40th of a second. And if we zoom in, we can see very good detail, very good sharpness. And 140 on an 85 is kind of pushing it, but you'll see that we can go much further. Now, a second one, my settings were a bit messed up and I didn't realize, which is something that happened a few times. If you look at this, 1/25th of a second, and we're shooting at f7.1 ISO 1600, and the results is very impressive. I wouldn't even imagine trying this with the X-T3. So this one is ISO 8000 at 1/100, and we can start to see some grain. Again, these are all edited. I did my own edits, so just for clarity, I think I can toggle before. No, let me go to the library view. All right, so it's rendering. Okay, so again, ISO 8000 at 100th of a second, and I'm using the kit lens for this one, shooting at 20mm. So if we go before, so we can see some grain. This is 100% crop. There is some fine grain, but it doesn't really matter. Apply and edit, and the grain isn't distracting. It doesn't look awful. It just looks like a bit of texture. Now this one, again, my settings were a bit whack. So we're shooting at f9 for whatever reason, I don't know. 3200 ISO and 1/30th of a second. And it isn't tack sharp, but the detail that we got is still very impressive in this one. So yeah, I'm very pleased. We did, if you can see here, there is a little bit of motion blur, but I don't think it's distracting or anything. It just adds to the overall image. Moving along, this is another one where I corrected my settings, and it's ISO 3200, 1/400th of a second at f2.8. So, you know, much more sensible settings. I could have lowered the ISO, but we can see the detail in the eyes and the eyelashes. 100% crop is tack sharp. It's just brilliant. And again, ISO 3200 at 1/80th of a second, and it's rendering. So 3200, 6400 are kind of a breeze for this full frame sensor. You know, normally shooting APS-C on the Fujifilm, on Canons, as soon as you touch 3200, that was when the grain started to come in real strong. 6400 was really where you would want to draw the line. You don't want to go above 6400, but with the S5, I can comfortably go into the 12,800 range. So this is 6400 using a flash, and I mean, I'm using a flash, so what can I say? This one I shot out of a plain window, ISO 12,800, shooting at 1/5 of a second. That's 1/5. and you can see there is grain, obviously, and there is a bit of motion blur in the lights down below, but overall 1/5. I did something like this before with my X-T3 at much faster shutter speeds, and I think it was 6400 ISO, and the result was unusable. So this is leaps and bounds better. Now we're going into some extreme territory. Same through the window, 1160 f1.8, 51200 ISO. So for this one, it's kind of a mess, if I'm being honest. If you zoom into 100%, you can kind of make out the details, but it was a very dark night overlooking a city. And let me go before edit, after edit. Again, nothing crazy, but I wouldn't probably use 51200 unless it's like an emergency. But anyways, so this is 51200 again, f4 1100. So looking back at this, I could have dropped the shutter speed way down because the IBIS is so good, but I wasn't thinking about that at the time, so it is what it is. Zooming in, a lot of grain, a lot of texture, but it's still a usable image. I just did some basic edits, but if you really insist, you could clean this up nicely and have a great look. This is before edits, this is after edits. And we have another one. This one is a bit more sensible. I'm shooting at 1/40th of a second, f4, 12800 ISO. So again, using that IBIS a bit more, it's a still shot, nothing moving, so 1/40th, and we lowered the ISO from 51200, and it's a colorful, brightly lit scene, but overall it was pitch black. There was no other light in the area, and I am satisfied with the results. So before and after. Now fireworks. Normally when shooting fireworks I would use a tripod and all that crazy stuff. This time I left it at home. I was just running out and did everything handheld, and I'm very, very, very satisfied. Of course, you can see a little bit of curviness in the lines. They're not perfectly straight, but overall it's just impressive. So 6400 ISO, f2 and 1/100, which isn't very slow shutter speed, but it gets much more interesting. So I was fiddling with the settings, and I even went down to 1/5 of a second at ISO 400, and as you can see here, the results are super impressive. Again, handheld, 1/5 shooting fireworks. These are some, again, when you're shooting fireworks, you kind of need a slow shutter speed to capture like more of the burst. You don't want it to snap too quickly because you'll only get like very short streaks. So again, 1/5 before edit, after edit, and I'm very impressed. Now I was pushing even further at 1/4 of a second, and as you can see, completely handheld for everything, very nice details, and it's just super impressive. Now this, it's a bit hazy, low light, ISO 8000. The detail is still pretty nice, but because of the fog, it just gives it that kind of soft, moody look, and again, very impressive. Here's another one shot on campus, ISO 12,800 at 1/60th of a second, and I'm shooting everything here handheld. Tripods are not ideal. Who likes carrying around a tripod if you don't have to? But yeah, f4.1 on the kit lens, that's the fastest at this focal length, so you just have to compensate with ISO. Pretty nice. Alright, so now a slightly different twist. For this photo here, what I did before was underexpose it significantly. I was shooting on aperture priority, and just a tip: at night, as much as possible, you want to use manual. In the day, aperture priority is fine, right? The camera can make some of the decision for you and you can still have a good time. However, at night, you want to take control of everything because you don't know when it's going to make a stupid decision and ruin your image. It might push the shutter speed too low or raise the ISO when it doesn't need to. So it's best if you take control yourself and do it your own way. Anyways, this was ISO 640. Again, I could have raised the ISO significantly, used a slower shutter speed, and just made a better image myself. But when I imported it, I was obviously disappointed, but guess what? I raised it 5 stops and I still had a usable image. So this is before and this is after. And obviously I made some edits, lowered the highlight, increased the shadows, raised it 5 stops, and it's just still a very nice image. A similar thing happened here. This one was 3.7 stops underexposed. So again, very good shadow detail, very good low light performance. And these were ISO 12,800. Not much to speak on here. This is before, this is after. In hindsight, you could always use a slower shutter speed. I mean, it's water that's moving, so it's no big deal, but sometimes you aren't paying that much attention to, you know, your settings. But anyway, so overall, even if you're an idiot, even if you screw your settings up, this camera is so good, it can make up for you. The low light performance is very good. I'm very satisfied, and that IBIS just allows you to shoot at some crazy slow shutter speeds that I just wouldn't dream of on certain other cameras. Obviously, if your subject is moving, then IBIS won't help you that much, but it is a tool if you need it. So if you enjoyed this video, if you found it useful, consider subscribing. I might be talking more about like the S5, the 1.8 primes, and just other stuff relating to the S5. So if you like that stuff, maybe consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.